Welcome back to Fashion here. So time for my review for the 2025 Canadian Grand Prix. So I thought overall the race was, not that interesting, I'd say, for the first, 60, 65 laps or so. Of course, we have that big moment of drama at the end. We'll get there eventually. But I think really, for the most part of this race, it was just an interesting, strategic race where you had, quite a few different strategies going on, one stopper, two stopper, the order that you did your stops on, doing, starting on mediums, going to hards, starting on hards, going to mediums, that sort of thing. But, overall, there's one real big talking point that's going to really overshadow this race. And it's really going to be the only thing that anyone in F1 is going to be talking about for the next couple weeks or so. So, for the start of the Grand Prix, Russell, of course, starting on pole, Verstappen P2. Russell gets a good start, stays in the lead. Verstappen stays P2. Antonelli, he has a good start. He gets past Piastri going into turn 3. So, you basically have a Mercedes 1-3 at this point. And on the opening lap, the only real big moves for position within the top 10 was the fact that Albon lost 2 positions, basically cut the, turn 10, 11 chicane, turn 8, 9 chicane. Can't remember the exact number, but basically cut the chicane going wheel to wheel with Franco Colapinto. Felt that he had to take the runoff area. You can see, in the still shot, he went airborne, trying to go over the grass there. And basically comes out, Colapinto kind of has to make a move to avoid him. And this lets Hulkenberg through to take that P9. So basically by the end of this lap, I know it says it from lap 11, but as far as I remember, there were no changes for position in the meantime. But Hulkenberg, really good start. He goes up 2 positions. Colapinto stays in the same position, and Albon lost a position as well on that opening lap. A couple laps later, we had Norris overtake Alonso, and that's for P6. So it was a battle on track. And those, of course, you had the strategy element as well going on this time. So you had the really early first stops for basically the group of 4 cars who were basically all on the same strategy. That was Russell, Verstappen, Antonelli, and Piastri. But then basically the next group behind were basically on alternative strategy, and that was Norris and Leclerc, who basically just started on the hard tires and were doing a different strategy for the rest for the Grand Prix. So they were actually in the front 2 positions at points. And I think, at least for Norris's case, it was a strategy that worked out pretty well until it didn't. We'll get there. So Albon, I think the tires this weekend being as soft as they were was, I think, good for the racing perspective, in the sense that it meant that, teams couldn't basically just push really flat out, do an easy one-stop race, and it has forced them to make, strategic decisions. But for Albon, it was a strategy that was not paying off very well. Stayed out too long on his medium tires, and about 15 or so laps into the Grand Prix, after everyone had most of the other drivers on in the same starting tires as him, the mediums, had pitted for their first stops. He was basically falling down the ordering, just getting eaten alive. So he was getting passed by Sainz, and also got passed by Stroll as well, who of course started P17. So just all around a really miserable Grand Prix for Albon. And then to basically the proverbial cherry on top, he would end up retiring with some kind of power unit issue about 40 laps into the Grand Prix. So not a great Grand Prix for Albon. Around the same lap, Stroll, after getting past Pierre Gasly at the hairpin, a bit naughty, goes a bit too aggressive defending his position from Gasly, and doesn't leave the car's width, as you can clearly see in the shot, and that forces Gasly off into basically the runoff area, going into the chicane, heading into the wall of champions. And for that move, Stroll was given a 10-second penalty. Pretty miserable weekend, home race all around for Stroll. Qualified 17th, race 17th, and picked up a penalty as well. So I think it was actually the first time for all the Canadian Grand Prix that he's done, first time that he finishes outside the points today. And then, of course, we get the big fateful battle that, is what is going to dominate headlines. And that is, of course, the contact between Piastri and Norris. So Norris, really, really strong pace throughout this Grand Prix, starting on the alternative strategy after really tricky qualifying on Saturday. He basically, overtook Alonso on track. I think got past Hamilton on strategy, and I think was already ahead of Leclerc as well. But basically that gets him up to P5, and he had really, really strong pace in the closing laps, and closing up to the back of Piastri. Basically didn't really make a move going into the final chicane, but gets a little bit of a better run going down the main straight. And basically Piastri is kind of in the middle of the track, he's entitled to do that. And he basically he decides to cover the inside of turn 1. Norris basically decides to go for a gap that's never really there. I think he initially brakes a little bit too early, but then basically tries to go for a gap that's basically already closed, and ends up making contact with kind of very light contact with the rear of Piastri's car, and that kind of sends him off track and sends him into the wall, broken suspension, and he's basically out on the spot. So, the team top brass at McLaren have basically been predicting that this was going to happen for several weeks now, that the two McLaren drivers were, eventually going to collide on track, given how, relatively even matched they were. And, that prediction would come true only a couple races later. I guess the good news for McLaren, though, is that unlike many, inter-teammate clashes, this one was pretty one-sided in the fact that, Norris was pretty much 100% at fault here. Piastri didn't really do anything wrong. And the fact that, Norris came over the radio basically apologizing right away, I think compared to other, inter-team spats, like thinking Rosberg, Hamilton, Verstappen, Ricciardo, or even, Vettel and Weber. This one I think is going to be a lot less dramatic than those ones, simply because it was so one-sided, and because the fact that, Norris was so open about the fact that it was entirely his fault. But that brings out the safety car. And of course, Norris, he now loses a massive chunk of points in the Drivers' Championship, both to Piastri, but also to Russell and Verstappen behind. So race finishes, actually we're not quite finished yet, but basically under the safety car. This was a move that was basically investigated after the race, and you can see Russell, of course, leading the Grand Prix, quite a big distance between himself and the safety car. He basically braked quite heavily in the middle of that long back straight. And you can see basically Verstappen's wheels are already in front of his. And basically Verstappen had to move out of the way to try not to run into the back of him. And that, of course, caused him to go in front of Russell. Of course, you're not allowed to overtake under the safety car. So Russell was basically on the radio right away saying, hey, he overtook me under the safety car. Whereas Verstappen was on the radio saying, what is he doing? He's braking, trying to brake check me, or basically trying to make me get a penalty, because of course, Verstappen's only 1 point away from having run a one race ban. And given, at the high level at which George Russell thinks, I would not be surprised if he was trying to do that deliberately to somehow get Verstappen a penalty and eventually a race ban. But yeah, nonetheless, stewards would investigate it after the race, and they basically decided no further investigation needed, and no penalties were required for that. But yeah, I thought quite cheeky by Russell there. So that is your 2025 Canadian Grand Prix race on ends behind a safety car. Unfortunately, we're not able to get a last lap shootout. So that is George Russell's 5th career victory. Very, very well deserved race. Fastest driver this weekend in qualifying. A great pole position yesterday, or I guess 2 days ago now. And then, of course, very, very strong. And basically looked in control of the race pretty much from the start lights to flag. And yeah, Verstappen just not really able to challenge him today. So taking a look at your race result for the 2025 Canadian Grand Prix, for some reason missing the Canadian flag there. So joining Russell on the podium are Max Verstappen and Kimi Antonelli. Antonelli getting his first podium in F1 and becomes the 3rd youngest podium sitter ever in F1 history, just behind Max Verstappen and Lance Stroll, of all people, funnily enough. P4 for Piastri, I think, this was definitely a race where it felt like McLaren could have won this. And, maybe we're starting to see the effects of the flexi wing, basically technical directive that came out before Spain. If maybe, Spain was just a McLaren track, so they were just always going to be dominant there. But maybe at tracks like Canada, lots of slow speed corners, maybe they're going to be a little bit more vulnerable here on out. P5, P6 for the two Ferraris, Leclerc ahead of Hamilton. Hamilton apparently with damage after hitting a groundhog on track. So again, possibly why you didn't really see exactly what happened there. But yeah, Hamilton's pace not so good. P7 for Alonso, best of the rest. 8th Hülkenberg, 9th Ocon, and 10th Sainz. Your rest of your finishers were Behrman, Tsunoda, Colapinto, Bortoleto, Gasly, Hadjar, and Stroll, with your 3 DNFs being Norris, Lawson, and Albon. Lawson retired with some kind of engine issue. Basically, Racing Bulls wanted to protect the engine for the next race out in Austria, and given that where he was, very, very low, basically no hope of points, they felt better to retire the car than to keep going on the engine. So I guess, yeah, pretty humiliating there if you're Lawson to basically be pulled out of the race because the team wants to protect the car. But yeah, of course, he's going to want to bounce back next time out in Austria. So taking a look at your team's championship and your driver's championship standings, Piastri, I guess, extends his lead at this point now with 198 points. P2 is Norris on 176, so now there's a 22-point gap between the two McLaren drivers. Verstappen, 3rd still, 4th Russell, 5th Leclerc, 6th Hamilton, 7th Antonelli, 8th Albon, 9th Ocon, 10th Hadjar, 11th Hülkenberg, 12th Stroll, 13th Sainz, 14th Gasly, 15th Tsunoda, and your one change, I think, in your driver's standings for this weekend is, actually, no, there's 2 changes. One was Ocon is now 9th ahead of Hadjar, so he's now the highest ranked Frenchman in Formula 1. And then, of course, Alonso moves up into 16th, he now has 8 points on the season. So, of course, basically before Alonso scored points, it was all the harder. Stroll has 14 points, Alonso has 0. But Alonso with the much improved Aston Martin package is really showing that, he's not going to need very much, and maybe just, some actual proper reliability on his car, and he's going to be able to get up to Stroll's point tally relatively quickly. And then 17th Behrman, 18th Lawson, 19th Bortoleto, 20th Colapinto, and 21st Doohan. And your teams, McLaren still lead, of course, 374 points for them, but they, of course, were not the highest scoring team this weekend. That, of course, was Mercedes, who moved back into 2nd on 199 points, 3rd Ferrari on 183, and Verstappen Racing in 4th on 162 points. I know there's Tsunoda drives for the team, but Verstappen does have 95% of the team's points. So, yeah, I think calling it Verstappen Racing is pretty accurate. 5th Williams, 55 points. 6th Haas, they moved past Racing Bulls. They're level on 28, but Haas do have the basically tiebreaker on countback, as they have the highest result, which I think is Ocon's 5th place in China. 7th, we already did Racing Bulls. 8th, Aston Martin, 22 points. So that moves, Alonso moves Aston past Sauber. Sauber down in 9th again on 20, and then Alpine in last on 11 points. So there you go. That is your review for the 2025 Canadian Grand Prix. Of course, pretty strategic Grand Prix. Not even though there's quite a bit of variation in strategy, we didn't see a whole lot of position changes, at least towards the front of the grid. And then, of course, the big one at the end was the contact between Piastri and Norris, and how I think Norris's, relatively recent reputation, I'd say last 2 years or so, for poor racecraft, poor, judgment and awareness. That reputation definitely took a hit, continues to take a hit. And the pace is clearly there. He was faster than Piastri for, large stretches of this Grand Prix, but again, doesn't seem to be doing a great job of executing this weekend. So there you go. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.